You'd have to be living under a rock not to realise that Australia's economy is not performing as well as the Reserve Bank would like, as the government would like, as most business people would like, as you as a property investor would like. But if you read some of the reports about the recent Reserve Bank meeting minutes after the July meeting, you'd be a little bit more concerned because things don't seem to be going as well as the public face of the Reserve Bank, the Governor Philip Lowe, was actually suggesting. So what does that mean to our economy? What does it mean to our property markets? What does that mean to your job, your wages, your properties? That's what I'm going to discuss in today's Property Insider chat with Dr. Andrew Wilson. Now, we do regular weekly videos, and if you're not catching up with those, go to propertyupdate.com.au and you can see them, or you can see them on our YouTube channel. Just Google Property Insiders. But today, this is the audio of the video we just did, where I have a chat with Andrew, and he actually introduces some really interesting ideas and concepts, as he always seems to do. And at the end of today's show, you're going to come out better understanding what's likely to be ahead for our property markets. We're going to give you some indication of what we think is going to happen to the market, when it's going to change, and what property values are going to do next year. We're also going to give you an indication of what's going to happen to interest rates and how that may affect you. So welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator, who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the fifth time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
The Reserve Bank Board meeting minutes for July paint a gloomy picture of the economy. It's a different picture than Governor Philip Lowe seems to paint in public. The Reserve Bank's left the door open for more interest rate cuts due to their concern about the state of the jobs market and the lack of wages growth. So what does that mean for our economy? What does it mean for our property markets? And I guess you're wondering, what does it mean for your pay packet? So to find out, let's talk to Australia's leading economist, Dr. Andrew Wilson, Chief Economist for My Housing Market. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, it was certainly a very interesting read. Certainly it tends to paint a different picture from that which has been publicly pronounced, particularly as we saw last week. As you'll recall, Michael, there was a bit of what I call a delusional gab fest between the Treasurer and the RBA Governor regarding the prospects for the economy. I guess they've got to be positive and optimistic. They don't want to create negativity and sort of refuel falling confidence. But certainly there's no doubt that those minutes do signal another cut, maybe cuts, to interest rates in the future, in the near future. And I'm a little concerned about that, to be quite honest.
Well, the Reserve Bank board members agreed before the July meeting, when they lowered the interest rates to 1%, they agreed to accelerate job growth. They recognised that we need to stimulate jobs. But the minutes of this last meeting, only a couple of weeks after that interest rate drop, they seem to suggest that the economy is a bit worse than we're expecting. And as you say, the market's now pricing in a 78% chance of another 0.25% cut later this year. So what's going on with our economy, Andrew?
Well, we really haven't made any progress in the issues that have been concerning central bank governors right around the world. Australia's been stuck in that same position of low interest rates, relatively low interest rates, and the failure to reignite inflation, particularly as a product of the failure to grow incomes. And of course, the theorists are now throwing out the rule book. It's interesting, Michael, and I don't want to get too deep into economic theory here, but certainly we're seeing the end of what has been a fundamental cornerstone for monetary policy, and that's something called the Phillips curve. And the Phillips curve was a product of research that reflected the relationship on interest rates and inflation. And basically it was that the lower you got with interest rates, the more you'll fuel employment growth, incomes growth, which would then work its way into inflation. Now, there was this process where you would find the actual point of the lower interest rate market where inflation started to rise, and that was called the non-accelerating inflation rate. But of course, this has all not worked this time. The rule book has had to be thrown out. And what concerns me to some degree is that maybe on a wing and a prayer, the Reserve Bank are clinging to the hope that perhaps the Phillips curve will re-establish itself as a cornerstone for monetary policy. I don't think it will. And a lot of theorists now around the world, macroeconomic theorists, are really recognising that nexus between lower interest rates and higher inflation is broken, and we've got to think of other mechanisms to grow the economy.
Well, the Reserve Bank seems to have hammered an ambitious stake in the ground. They're indicating they want to drop unemployment to 4.5%, and arguing that at that rate, employment's going to be reasonable. They're going to consider it full employment. I remember when full employment was considered a much higher level than that. They think the excess capacity in the labour market is going to be soaked up, wages are going to start rising, and their argument is that that's going to drive inflation to their target range. But I don't know, to me it seems like quite a challenge. The last time unemployment's been that low was over a decade ago, and inflation really hasn't been in that 2 to 3% range other than spasmodically for quite some time. Is it going to work?
I don't think it will work, Michael, and I think this is recognition now around the world to some degree. And I think the problem the Reserve Bank has is that it really sat on its hands for a number of years and didn't act through what I believe, and I think most recognise, was almost an obsession with Sydney house prices, that they had some concern about an over-controlled housing market, bubble bursting as the theory goes. So they kept rates too high for too long. And now, of course, they've done that 180-degree turn and trying now to re-stimulate the economy. And really nothing's changed in the economy, Michael, over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, we've known that inflation was stuck low. We've known that incomes growth was stuck low. And yet we've continued to hope and pray that things would change. Well, they haven't changed. And now we're back to, I guess, vaudeville and cutting interest rates in the hope that it will refuel the jobs market. I don't think it will. And I think even the minutes of the Reserve Bank meeting, Michael, have given us an insight to exactly what is happening in the labour market, which should give us some concern, and that's about the participation rate. And I just don't know where the jobs are going to come from to push our unemployment rate down by a full 1%. Those previous low unemployment rates you mentioned, Michael, were a product of a once-in-a-generation mining boom, which created the demand for infrastructure development, which was very labour-intensive. All the labour-intensive industries, all the labour-intensive submarkets that we need to be ticking over are actually going backwards. And of course, that's residential construction, commercial construction, and the retail sector. And of course, agriculture is suffering from the drought. So I just don't know where these jobs are coming from. And as I said, I think that if we look close at those participation rate numbers, that's actually of more concern to me and what it reflects of the particular underlying nature of the economy.
So participation rates have increased considerably, and that means that even though more people are in jobs, the unemployment rate isn't going down. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, that's right, Michael, but we've got to understand, why is the participation rate increasing? And I think this is particularly in the over 65s, which are at record participation rate levels. I think what we're seeing is the increase in participation rate is forcing people back into the workforce who can't support themselves, particularly on fixed incomes. And I think that this shows that it's a pincer movement of pushing people back into the workforce, because the workforce, the labour market, is not producing the higher incomes through the ancillary sub-markets that reflect fixed incomes, residential investment, the stock market. And that means people are pushed back into work because they can't live. We've seen the savings ratio is at record low levels, so people are pushing into their savings just to survive because incomes growth is so low. And now we're seeing people being forced back into the workforce. Now, that's not a scenario for me that should give you optimism about the job capacity or the capacity to create the jobs for these people who are getting increasingly desperate to find income.
Well, these concerning things you're bringing up seems to contradict the positive spin that the Reserve Bank governor put out not that long ago when he met Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. And in his words, he said, I agree 100% with you. He said, the economy is growing and the fundamentals are strong. But the minutes don't really suggest that, do they?
Firstly, we can suggest, well, where are the jobs going to come from with these lower interest rates? It will take some time to refuel the housing market and create more demand for construction, residential construction, particularly apartments, which are so labour intensive and which have been a key driver of our economy in recent years. Now, that's going to take some time, Michael. And we're also seeing commercial construction or planned commercial construction starting to decline as well, which is of a concern. So those lower interest rates are certainly going to take some time to work their way into increased residential construction. And I'm not sure that, given the nature of consumer sentiment, whether the lower interest rates will also increase retail spending. I don't think that the tax cuts, which of course are a positive, are going to be translated into increased spending in the same way that when we got the boost during the post-GFC period, that worked its way into increased consumption. I think we're saving as desperately as we can at the moment, Michael, and it's really been a reflection of all the doom and gloom and negativity that's infected our commentary and the issues over overinflated house prices. People are thinking, well, I'm just going to pay down my mortgage. I'm not going to spend this money. Now, having said all that, I think the other thing that has to be mentioned, Michael, is the fact that the international circumstances are working clearly against the Reserve Bank now. Now, what we're going to see likely, almost 100% likely, I believe, at the end of this month is a cut in official interest rates. The US is becoming concerned that its inflation rate is not picking up, its incomes growth is not where it should be, and they're going to cut rates. Now, of course, they've had a considerable period of pushing rates up, so they have a little bit of ammunition in the, I guess, to be able to stimulate the economy. But what they're worried about is that the US dollar is now too high. They want to see that lower. Now, of course, what the Reserve Bank governor wants to see is a lower Australian dollar. But of course, if the US dollar is weakening, then those efforts to push our dollar down are going to be neutralised. And of course, what we're also seeing is now with the prospect of a new Prime Minister in the UK, we're looking more likely to have a hard Brexit, which will mean that there's going to be some real issues in terms of the perceptions of the UK currency. Now, we've already seen a weakening of sterling. The UK currency is now gone backwards. We're also seeing the Eurozone stating, because its interest rates are still at zero, that it's going to start, central banks of the Eurozone are going to start buying government bonds again. So what I'm saying is this will only put downward pressure on currencies in the global market, which will unfortunately neutralise our lower interest rates. So really, we should have been lowering interest rates when the rest of the world was raising rates, or certainly were putting a floor under lower rates, not now when everybody else is going down, because it won't create the lower dollar that we need as part of our job creation environment to improve our export sector.
Looking at the property market, clearly the lower rates and more jobs are going to be positive for our property markets. And unfortunately, some commentators are suggesting we're on the cusp of another boom with surging house prices. I'm sure you've read that as well, but I can't see another property boom ahead.
No.
And if there is one, I can see that's actually going to create quite some policy dilemma for the Reserve Bank.
Well, there won't be a property boom, Michael. History will always tell us that that's a very strong relationship between lower interest rates and higher house prices and more demand. Now, we've already seen that. There's no doubt that house prices are starting to stabilise in Sydney and Melbourne, the recent declines. We're now clearly reaching for the bottom of the market. Clearance rates are remarkably in Sydney pushing up towards 80%. They're around 70% in Melbourne. We know that that will mean higher prices. Now, also listing numbers are low, so we've got to mention that. But that sellers will come back into the market, but at lower levels. But the reason we won't have a boom, Michael, is we still have restricted lending to investors. And investors are the key ingredient for any house price boom, as we saw in Sydney and as we saw in Melbourne. It's really cloud cuckoo land, Michael, to be talking of any price boom in our housing markets, because that missing ingredient, that key ingredient, which are investors, are still a long way off to get back to anywhere near the levels that we had during the strong prices growth of 3 or 4 years ago.
I agree with you. Interest rates are lower and serviceability criteria have become a bit easier. So banks are lending a bit more, but the missing ingredient is still the ability to get the loans because of the harder requirements from the banks. And we don't want a boom. So I'm comfortable that the market's moving ahead.
Yes.
It's had its breather. It's dropped in some areas. In other areas, parts of Australia, it's stabilised. But in my mind, this is a very good counter-cyclical opportunity to get in when the downside is minimal and the upside is more positive now than it's been for a number of years. But I think if people are doing it and they're going to expect 20% property price increases, digit growth, they're going to be sorely disappointed.
Look, I agree, Michael. And I think next year, just hazarding an educated estimate of price growth, I think all things being equal, and I suppose that's the get out of jail card, I think that we're looking for perhaps 3 to 5% growth in that Sydney and Melbourne market, which is quite a reasonable result over the year. Now, that depends, of course, on the factors such as the economy at least remaining reasonable through that period, and, of course, migration remaining reasonably strong, as it's likely to do, because the government can't turn the migrant tap off, because that's such an important part of economic growth. But of course, that's well short 3 to 5% of the sort of numbers that are being bandied around. Again, it's a cheap headline. We shouldn't buy into this, but unfortunately, these headlines will always be with us until we do have it.
I click on them, Andrew, because I want to hear what others are saying.
Well, that's true, Michael, but it is, as we described, a little unkindly perhaps as sucker bait, but it does work, that bait. I noticed there was another one that I saw last week, somebody coming out from the US, another fortune teller who's predicting, his headline was prices to fall, I think 10 to 15%. That is fall 10 to 15% next year. Of course, it got a few headlines around the traps, perhaps not as many as it would have previously, but that was based on some fanciful analysis that this was all about fewer Chinese investors in the Australian market. And of course, the relationship between higher house prices and Chinese investors has been really debunked over previous years, because it was only a very, very small proportion of the market that was engaged in from Chinese overseas buyers.
Well, rather than looking for the next hotspot and seeing where that growth period is going to be, and then as they're already bringing out now the new hotspots, I'd be suggesting that there isn't one Melbourne property market, there isn't one Sydney property market, or Brisbane market. So there are markets within markets, geographically, price point, type of dwelling, and there are definitely always going to be areas that outperform, and there are areas that are going to lag, and that's what we've always suggested. Look for those areas where there's multiple pillars supporting the local economy, local jobs, and look for areas where there's good wages growth and people have got steady jobs. That's going to underpin the home buyers there, it's going to hold the property market there. Don't chase investor type properties.
Yeah, that's right, Michael. And I think in a way, a flatter cycle means the end of those sort of hysterical hotspot analysis. I also want to suggest that even though as a macroeconomist, I have concerns about the nature of monetary policy, what it's expected to achieve, and I don't think it will, and its impact on the property market. What we've seen is the clearest relationship between economic policies and the housing market are interest rates. Now, we've really actually seen when we have periods of higher unemployment, it doesn't have the same impact on the property market as changes in monetary policy does, that is interest rates up or down. So I think that even if we have a period of higher unemployment, which of course is against all what the Reserve Bank's trying to do, I don't think that will have a material effect on our housing markets. I think it's all about interest rates in terms of the housing markets, and more falls in interest rate are obviously a positive thing for the housing market and for those in terms of borrowing capacity, and for those that are paying off a mortgage, puts more money in their pockets. But look, having said all that, Michael, we are in this conundrum that advanced global economies are in, and it means we'll have to switch from monetary policy, that is interest rates, to fiscal policy. And there are two ways that that's addressed by governments, that is by trying to stimulate the economy with government spending. That's through either direct spending through such things as infrastructure projects or through tax cuts. At least the positives for Australia are the current account position is very positive and strong at the moment. Our balance of trade and our terms of trade is very strong. And of course, our budget is in a positive territory. So we still have the capacity, if we move, which I think we will have to do, to fiscal policy to be able to stimulate the economy where others can't. So let's not be too pessimistic about Australia's prospects.
Well, the Reserve Bank governor has similarly said it can't only be in their hands. The government here don't have to step in, and it looks like they're listening, so that's great. So some green shoots ahead, some headwinds holding us back. But thanks again, because a great chat today.
Good on you, Michael. Thank you.
Some great information there from Dr. Andrew Wilson. And in a moment, I'm going to share with you my mindset message. But before that, just to summarise or add to the thoughts we were just discussing with Andrew, I can see that the Sydney property market is very likely near its bottom, maybe even there when you have a look at the high auction clearance rates and the slight increase in asking prices and also resulting selling prices. The Melbourne market's nearing its bottom. The extra interest rate drops, the tax cuts we're getting, the increasing confidence, all that's going to lead to property values being a little bit higher at the end of this year and even higher at the end of 2020. But we can't see the property boom that some people are predicting because there are clearly some headwinds ahead. I've gone through how we use our top-down approach to buy the right sort of properties in my chat with Andrew a couple of minutes ago, and we then find the right location, the right property in that location. But there is another way of outperforming the market averages, and that's to manufacture some capital growth, particularly at a time when the general market growth isn't so high. And I do that through renovations and particularly through property development. But not every property is a developable property, and not every property development, especially at this stage of the market, is profitable. And that's why it's timely to remind you that once a year, since 2003, I've conducted my property renovations and development workshop, and it's coming up in October this year. Why not go to realestateworkshop.com.au and find out all about this workshop? It's 2 days, Melbourne, October 26th and 27th. Books out every year. It's a small group environment. There's only 50 people. And in there, I spill my guts. I explain to you exactly, my team explain to you exactly how we're currently involved in over 40 property developments. It was over 50 last year, but currently the market's a little bit quieter. People are finding it a bit harder to get finance. So we explain to you from beginning to end how we do it, and with the help of a couple of finance brokers, how you can get some finance to do this as well, to become a property developer, to step up to the big league, to take advantage of the opportunities presented by this great stage of the property cycle. Go to realestateworkshop.com.au, and when you join me, what I'm going to give you is my A to Z manual of property development, all our own internal checklists that we've developed at Metropole, so you're going to already get going in the right way. Let's get on with my mindset moment.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's mindset message, I'd like to talk to you about facing your enemies. It's a lesson I learned from one of my early mentors, the late Jim Rowan. It's about fear. Because none of us were born with courage. But if you think about it, none of us were born with fear either. So our fears came along, they were brought along either by our experiences or by what somebody, often our parents, taught us, or by things that we read, saw in the media. Now, of course, some fears are valid, like walking in a bad part of town in the middle of the night. But once you've learned to avoid that situation, you don't need to live in fear of that. Fears, even the most basic ones, can destroy our ambitions. And that's what's bad about them. They can destroy your fortunes. They can destroy your relationships. If left unchecked, they can destroy your life. Fear is one of the common enemies, the many enemies that we've got lurking inside us. So let me tell you about 5 other enemies that we face from within that I was taught about by my mentor, Jim Rowan. And Jim Rowan said the first enemy that you've got to destroy before it destroys you is indifference. What a tragic disease this is. said Jim Rohn. Ho-hum, let it slide, it'll drift along. Here's one of the problems with drifting. You can't drift your way to the top of the mountain. The second enemy inside us, according to Jim Rohn, is indecision. Of course, indecision is the thief of opportunity and enterprise. It's going to steal your chance for a better future. Take a sword and destroy this enemy. The third enemy inside us, according to Jim Rohn, is doubt. Sure, there's room for healthy skepticism. You wouldn't believe everything. You shouldn't believe everything. Don't believe everything you're told. But you can't let doubt take over. Many people doubt the past. They doubt the future. They doubt each other. They doubt the government. They doubt the possibility. They doubt the opportunities. Worst of all, they doubt themselves. So I'm telling you, doubt's going to destroy your life and your chance of success. It'll empty both your bank account and your heart. Doubt's an enemy. Go after it. Get rid of it. The fourth enemy Jim Rohn spoke about is worry. Now, we all got to worry at times. Just don't let worry conquer you. Instead, let it alarm you. Worry can be useful. If you step off the curb and suddenly a car's coming to hit you, boy, you got to worry. But you can't let worry loose like a mad dog that drives you into a small corner. Here's what you got to do with your worries. Drive them into a small corner. Whatever is out to get you, you got to get it. Whatever is pushing you on, you got to push back. And the fifth internal enemy that Jim Rohn talked about is overcaution. It's the timid approach to life. Timidity is not a virtue, it's an illness. If you let it go, it'll conquer you. Timid people, they don't get promoted, they don't get advanced, they don't grow, they don't become powerful in their sphere. You've got to avoid overcaution. Do battle with this enemy, said Jim Rohn. Do battle with your fear, said Jim Rohn. Build your courage to fight what's holding you back, what's keeping you from your goals, what's keeping you from your dreams. Be courageous in your life, in your pursuit of things, in pursuit of things you want, and that will help you become the person you want to become. Well, that was an interesting show. Or at least I think it was, because I really enjoyed my chat with Andrew Wilson about what's going on. He's got some wonderful insights, hasn't he? And if you got some benefit from it, if you learned something from it, please tell somebody about it. Our audience is growing significantly, not just in Australia, but around the world. And I really appreciate the fact that you take the time to listen a couple of times a week. This is great. And my mission is to help make you a more informed, successful property investor, business person, entrepreneur. So let's help as many people as we can lift them up. Tell a couple of people about the show one way or another, please. And I really also appreciate when you leave a review. Now, I just found one that's escaped me because I like to read them out as soon as I can, because every time I do read out a review, if you hear your name, I'd love to say thank you by gifting you a book. All you need to do is email me, michael@metropole.com.au, and Julie S. 58 left a review last year. Julie, I'm sorry I skipped this one. And you said, a 5-star review, thank you so much. And you said, I often listen to Michael's podcast on Saturday mornings and thoroughly enjoy them. Today I tuned into the 6 things the financial media won't tell you and super parents raise super kids. And then she went into a lot of detail in her review about what she got out of it. And that really pleases me. I'm so pleased, Julie. And at the end you said, overall, thank you, Michael, for the ongoing inspirational advice, and I wish I had tuned in a lot earlier in my property investment interests. That's okay, Julie. I'm here in the long term to help you, and I look forward to being part of your journey. Also, I'm looking forward to being part of your journey twice a week on the Michael Yardney podcast. Catch up with you real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?